So this is all that I had for you, and I will go to your questions right now. Okay, 1 second. Let me switch here because this is the Q&A screen, and also you have the information about the discount if someone wants to use the code. Before we get to the questions, though, I just remembered, let me close the poll so that I can see what is it that we will be talking about next month. 1 second. Okay, so the topic you've selected is motivation, discipline, and change. Oh, this is a very useful one for sure. I will share the results with you so that you can see, if you're interested, what they were like. But we'll be talking about discipline, change, and motivation. I'm kind of happy about this topic because I really think it's quite useful. So let's go. Hello, thank you for the amazing webinar. I'm wondering what your perspective is on how George Kelly, that would be my constructivist God, influenced and was influenced by other psychologists in his time. For example, Kurt Lewin and his student Harold Kelly seem to have similar ideas in attribution theory, but they don't cite each other. Do you know of any connections? So this is a very interesting question for people who like psychological theory. So I will try to be concise. And if you like, you can email me and we can go back and forth in this. Kelly was really tremendously influential even before he published his book in 1955. The trouble is that I don't know, the field is such that he was very rarely quoted by people. So he is very frequently recognized as being a strong influence when people give speeches. Like I remember this talk that Aaron Beck gave, and then he said, oh yeah, sure, like half of my CBT came from Kelly, but I don't really see it quoted in any of the books. So they have influenced each other quite a lot. I believe, like for example, there is a huge difference in the way that I look at these things is that both attribution theory and CBT are basically just a very particular borderline simplified interpretations of Kelly. I know that in terms of attribution theory, this is not quite accurate since it goes back to the beginning of the 20th century in one way or another. But constructivism is fundamentally different because in constructivism, we don't attribute anything to reality. We construct it or construe it, depending on what strand of constructivism you like. I know it may sound like hair splitting, but it's actually quite different because in standard CBT, there is an idea that there is such a thing as wrong thinking or irrational thinking or, like inaccurate thinking or whatever. In constructivism, we really don't use any of these terms. In fact, Kelly explicitly says there is no such thing as irrational behavior. There is just behavior that we understand and behavior that we don't understand. So in that sense, attribution theory is similar to Kelly, but I think epistemologically, Kelly is more relational than they are. Because for Kelly, we essentially, I guess this may sound a little radical, but create reality in a sense. Like reality is nothing in and of itself. It's just something that we interact with and then gain experience from. And that experience helps us give meaning to other people, objects, and things. Whereas in CBT, they talk about interpretations very often. But for Kelly, it's not an interpretation that is reality for you. So that would be the difference. And they don't quote each other, and why they don't quote each other other than vanity, I really don't know. And I think, in my opinion, also, I think Kelly has this problem that his psychology is extremely difficult to grasp. Like he doesn't use any of the normal language that psychologists use. Like in fact, like in the beginning, in the preface of his Psychology of Personal Constructs in Volume 1, he says, in this theory, there is no ego, no motivation, no learning, like basically eliminates every word from the standard psychological vocabulary. So people can be inspired by Kelly, but if they operate in the realm of, let's say, normal psychological language, it's very difficult to translate him in that sense. So I think that's why he's kind of esoteric, I guess, would be the word in that way. I think it's a great shame because his theory is incredibly beautiful and works very well. So for attribution theory, I cannot say explicitly that it was influenced by Kelly, just to wrap it up. And as far as CBT goes, a lot of it, both Beck and Ellis were incredibly influenced by Kelly. There are silicone skin-colored finger covers that are nice and feel good on the skin. They're also satisfying to just fidget with the silicone. Yeah, I didn't hear that the skin-colored ones exist, but that's really very good because then it makes it much more usable. So thank you for sharing. I love TV. The only way my mom and I connect is watching TV together. Why not use fidgets while watching TV? Yeah, of course you can use fidgets while watching TV. It's just that using a fidget while watching TV is more of a competing response technique, but sure, use the fidget. Yeah, I've absolutely no objections to this. Something that has helped me a lot to reduce speaking is wearing press or nails. I usually pick the skin around my cuticles, and press on nails make it really hard to do. They're kind of thick and rounded, so it makes it almost physically impossible to pick unconsciously. They also look cute, so they work as a sort of psychological barrier and motivation not to pick. Yes, I should have put that on the list. You're absolutely right. Press-on nails are quite useful as well. But whether or not people will use them, I guess, depends on what kind of aesthetics they like. But absolutely, yes. They basically work the same way that gloves do. Not a question, just a comment. I pick my feet heels, so my husband always tells me to wear long socks. I hate to do that, but it is a form of stimulus control. Absolutely. I don't know if your husband uses the term stimulus control, but he is absolutely right. Wearing socks would be a good way of doing stimulus control. But in addition to this, like if you still, because sometimes people will describe that when they use stimulus control, that, for example, gloves, they will still feel like a kind of restlessness in their fingers. And maybe you feel something similar if you just wear socks and then you can't pick. Then it would be useful to use something like a fidget that someone else mentioned here, or something else to just help you get rid of that energy. I understand how boredom can be used as a message to change activities. Can you please extrapolate on how boredom and anxiety are related? Is it that boredom is used to avoid anxiety, or does boredom trigger anxiety if you do not change activities? It seems to me that boredom is almost always an invitation to change activities, to dive into emotions that may be, or to dive into emotions that may be stressful. So yeah, the most obvious, I think, message of boredom is just change activities, or at least whatever it is that you're doing, do it differently. That's what it would be. But what happens when people, let's say you're watching TV, and then because people like Netflix, a lot, so they will just binge on a TV show. Basically, this is a misguided attempt to relax themselves. But then after episode 75 out of 7,000, your body you are bored, but effectively, because this is your only means of relaxation that you know of, you continue to be there and you're bored, and you're still there and you're bored. So what happens is that then your mind starts going off and thinking about other things. Basically, your mind checks out of the situation that you're in. And then because you feel trapped, you're there in front of the TV, you likely start thinking and planning and organizing. Especially if you're kind of a type A person, then your brain has a really hard time switching off. And then when you remain in the activity that bores you, but half of your brain is thinking about everything that you didn't do and everything that you have to do, you start feeling a little bit overwhelmed. First of all, because there's too much processing to do, like there are the thoughts and the feelings and then the TV. And also because, when you have a long to-do list, just going through that in your mind will cause people to feel anxious. So that's what it is. The reason why I said it is not that boredom generates anxiety. It's more that people will say they're bored, but then when I question them, more deeply about it, it turns out that they are actually just anxious. But for some reason, they don't act on, because anxiety, the trouble with anxiety is that it's a very vague feeling. Like if you remember when I gave you examples of feelings as emotions earlier, I used very clear ones like guilt or sadness, where it's kind of simple to figure out the message. But anxiety, Kelly would say that anxiety is basically just awareness that whatever's happening right now makes no sense to you. And if you don't find any meaning in it, that means that you can't deal with the situation. Because in constructivism, meaning it's not some kind of mystical concept. It's really just something that will give you instructions on what to do. Like meaning just tells you, okay, if this, then you use this tool. And anxiety means that you don't have a tool to deal with whatever it is that's going on in your mind. But people will, because then they stay paralyzed and don't do anything. And when they don't do anything for a long time, they just kind of observe that as boredom. I don't mean to say that intrinsically these are connected, but that people mistaken one for the other. That was my point. Is there any association between excoriation disorder and other disorders such as bipolar or PTSD? There's no direct connection, but they can be associated, of course. I think anything that will produce intense emotions can lead eventually to skin picking, although obviously not with everyone. But the most common co-occurring conditions with skin picking are other BFRBs, in fact. So very, very, very often people who pick their skin will pull their hair or bite their nails or, like bite their cheeks or any of these repetitive behaviors. Then you have anxiety disorders. They're also quite common. Then you have OCD. Bipolar is not very often related to that. PTSD, I wouldn't say that it's certainly not a cousin of skin picking, but because PTSD can generate so many intense and unpleasant memories or feelings, very often picking can be an outlet for that because it's a way to self-soothe, essentially. So they can be interrelated, but one doesn't cause the other. They just kind of exist parallel to each other and then overlap sometimes. Are prior webinars available to view as a recording? Yes, all the webinars that we've had since we've been having these are on YouTube, so you can find them all. I find most often that my automatic picking turns into focused. So it starts automatically and then becomes focused. Even when implementing stimulus control or competing responses, I find I'm very resistant to stop and often just choose to pick. Any suggestions and advice? What type of therapy helps with focused picking? So this is a very interesting question, and this is something that I hear relatively frequently in therapy. So I would say it's a very relevant question. So if automatic picking turns into focused picking, I think stimulus control is still a good way to go, but those more unpopular kinds of stimulus control, like someone suggested using acrylic nails. This is a good thing providing that you can or want to, is because then you really cannot pick. You're just physically prevented from doing this. But when it comes to this transition where you become aware that you're picking and then you say, oh, well, I'll just keep going. I think that's more of a matter of discipline, resistance to change, and perhaps also the fact that there is a secondary benefit to picking that you haven't quite discovered yet. So these are all the directions in which you can take this. Next month, we'll talk about motivation and discipline and difficulty with change. So hopefully you can get some good advice about that next month. But I would explore resistance to change if I were you, and think about all the reasons as to why maybe I wouldn't want to change. When I ask this question very bluntly, like, is there any reason why you wouldn't want to give up picking? I usually get a very, upset response, like, what a stupid question to ask. But it's not a stupid question at all. Like, if a habit persists for 5, 10, 20 years, it obviously does something incredibly important for you. So it's not easy to give up. So I would focus on finding what that important thing is, and then slowly reducing it. And if you do choose to pick, maybe try to use what I suggested earlier, which is to say, okay, but 5 minutes, and then stop after 5 minutes. And if you have someone to keep you accountable, like someone you live with, then they can help you time the picking, because that's one way to allow yourself to get some of the whatever it is that it gives you, but not so much that you completely destroy your skin. And also it gives you some degree of control. Not quite a question, but a comment. Anecdotally, stimulus control worked very well for me during this webinar. Well, I'm glad to hear that. It works in real time. I would like to make it clear, since I began watching your webinars, I have reduced my picking little by little. In the long term, the focus kind. However, until tonight, the short term meant automatic picking during the webinar. Tonight, I wore gloves and there was no picking, all capital letters. So thank you so much for this and all you do. Regards, will not read the name. Well, I'm very glad that it helped. And here is one voice that is not mine that says that gloves work well. So wear gloves. I'm very happy to hear that. Thank you for the webinar. Happy Thanksgiving. Oh, likewise. Where can I learn about how much the program costs? Well, on the program website. The price is, I think, $196 per month. But then if you use the coupon, you'll get a discount code. There will be a short webinar next week, I believe next Thursday, where it will be just like 15 minutes long, where I will present what the program is like. Because in this webinar, I prefer to talk about the topics that you select and answer questions than promote the program. So there is like one short webinar that I do a week after this standard webinar. So you can sign up for that, and then I will explain exactly how the program works and what you can expect, and then you can see whether or not it will be good for you. Okay, so there are a number of compliments that I skipped. I thank you, everyone. It's just that I feel very weird reading all the, it's like I'm complimenting myself out loud. Let me see if there are any questions. It's very difficult to use gloves because they are uncomfortable for me. And then if I'm uncomfortable, then I tend to pick a lot. But I don't know if this is just an excuse not to wear them, because if I did wear them, then I wouldn't pick. Well, I think you kind of answered your own question there. Yeah, I can understand how it can be frustrating when it's uncomfortable, but at the same time, it's not like there's only one type of gloves in this world. So you have gloves made of different materials with different textures and, different thickness, and some that will warm your hands, others it won't. So just, they're not like one generic glove. That's one. And second of all, it's precisely what you said. What if this is an excuse not to do it? I think I should maybe add resistance to change to the list of webinar topics for next time, because I think that's a very important topic. I think it was on the list for a while, but then I removed it because no one voted for it. And I really think that it's an important topic, because, well, that's why people usually stop changing. And so I'll add this next time. I'll write it down. From what I can see, these are all the questions. Oh, someone says resistance to change is on there, but it did not get voted highly. Sad emoji face. Yeah, I know. Well, it is a fascinating topic, and I could talk about Kelly all evening. That would make me terribly happy, because he has a wonderful theory of resistance in psychotherapy. But you never know. One day. Well, actually, if we're talking about motivation and discipline, I can maybe put a slide or two next time about resistance, and then maybe that will get people more interested in the topic, because maybe it sounds a little technical, like resistance to change. What on earth is that? Anyways, these are all the questions. Thank you so much, and I hope to see you in December or in the program, because I see some of the people who've been writing here are my clients. So. See you in a month, and have a pleasant evening, and happy Thanksgiving, and whatever else I skip until the next webinar. Bye.